All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar, Supporting Community-Based Video Archiving for Human Rights with Witness, with our guest speaker, Yvonne Ng. My name is Nathan Goldwag, and I want to thank everyone so much for showing up here tonight. I'm a little bit biased because I used to work volunteer for Witness, but it's a great organization, and I really can't wait for you all to hear more about it. Yvonne is an audiovisual archivist with 15 years of experience working at the intersection of human rights, video, technology, and archives. As Senior Program Manager of Archives at Witness, she collaborates with regional teams to support partners to preserve human rights video and develops accessible guidelines and training materials related to archiving and preservation. Tonight, she will discuss her work at Witness supporting human rights defenders and will share examples of projects, as well as some challenges and lessons learned along the way. Before we get started, our next event is a tour of the Prospect Park Alliance Archives on May 17th at 5:45 p.m. You can register for that on our website or join a waitlist if it's still up. And also, I want to make sure people know that nominations for the Art Board are live right now, and we really encourage people to participate in that. There should be a link in the chat to the form for that. Final housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded, so if you want to turn off your camera, please do that now. And please silence your microphones for the duration of tonight's talk. If you have any questions or comments, drop them in the chat box, and we'll have time at the end of the session to answer them. And there'll also be links to Witness's website and our own website there too. Thank you very much, and I will hand it over to Yvonne.
All right, I think I am unmuted. Can you give me a thumbs up, Nathan, if you can hear me? Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. I think the Okay, so I think the recording's going again. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you especially to Sam and Nathan for inviting me to join. It's great to be here. So presentation tonight is going to be about supporting community-based video archiving for human rights. I'm going to first start by telling you a little bit more about Witness for those of you who might not be familiar with the organization. And then I'll share some examples of initiatives and projects where we have been supporting community-based archiving for human rights. And then I will also just talk about some of the lessons learned and the challenges that we've kind of come upon along the way. So let me just arrange my screen a little bit. All right. Just to give you a little introduction to Witness, we are a global nonprofit organization whose mission is to help people use video and technology to protect and defend human rights. And so when I talk about Witness to different audiences and introduce Witness, I always start by sharing our mission, but I also like just to show a picture of like what Witness really is, which is a team of really committed human rights activists and human rights defenders. So bonus points if you can find me in this picture. You can put it in the chat if you can figure out where I am. So Witness, we're a team of about 55 full-time staff based in about a dozen different countries all around the world. We all work remotely. So this photo you see this doesn't happen very often. This is like maybe a once in 1.5 year occasion where we all meet in person, and sometimes meeting people for the first time on our teams that we've worked with for a couple of years. So this is Witness. In terms of how we're organized along regional programs. So we have regional programs in the United States, in Latin America and the Caribbean, which includes Brazil as well, Middle East and North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Asia and the Pacific. And so our regional programs work on developing like long-term relationships with partners and allies in their regions, and they lead our collaborative projects with our partners. As you can see on the map, we currently don't have a European program, but we have been working on a limited term project in Ukraine for the last few years. We also have a few non-regionally based programs, of which the Archives program is one. So we have the Archives program, which I'm going to talk a lot more about in this presentation. And we also have a Videos Evidence program. The Video as Evidence program is a program that collaborates between activists, lawyers, and international justice organizations to enhance the evidentiary value of video. Our Technology Threats and Opportunities program is a program that engages technology companies and works on supporting policies and standards that help human rights advocates to safely and effectively use video within our sort of emerging technological landscape. And then finally, we have a global digital engagement program, which is focused on getting our guidance and our resources out to human rights defenders and to ordinary people who might be witnessing human rights violations in their communities, to get our resources out to those people where it's needed and when it's needed. So the Archives program is made up of myself. I'm the senior program manager. I'm based here in New York City. And my colleague, Ines Eisengartman-Ezes, who is our program coordinator, and she's based in Sao Paulo, Brazil. So there's just the two of us. We're both audiovisual archivists by training. I don't know if any of you who are tuning in today might know Ines. She's been very active in this field for a long time, both internationally and in Brazil, as an advocate for audiovisual preservation. And she's been with our team for just over the last 2 years. And I've been with Witness for going on 15 years now, so a really long time. I actually started off as Witness's own archivist, and then over the years, I kind of transitioned more onto the programs side of things, and sort of initiated the Archives program as one of our non-regional programs. So before I kind of go into the examples of our work, I just wanted to give you kind of a big general overview of how Witness works. So this graphic that you see here is what we call our holistic model or our theory of change. So essentially like how Witness conceives of how we make change or have impact in our work. So if you look along across the top, that is sort of how we envision our kind of local change. So starting on the top left, listen and anticipate. We listen to frontline witnesses who are using video technology, and also try to anticipate the threats and opportunities that arise that can affect their safe and effective use of video for human rights. On the top right, we also collaborate and learn, and this is a major part of our work. This is where we act in close collaboration with partners on key human rights issues and campaigns, and in the process, we learn from our partners and about the critical needs and strategies that can be employed. From that sort of top local change, we try to scale and broaden what we learn through our work through the quadrant on the bottom left, which is create and share. And so this is the part of our work where we create and share timely guidance on using video and technology for human rights. And we also support different communities of practice that we're part of through training and field building within our regions and in our areas of expertise. And then on the bottom right is our systems change work. This is the work we do to take what we learn from listening, anticipating, and from collaborating with partners to amplify the needs that we're hearing to systems level stakeholders. So in this case, like technology companies, policymakers, to advocate on the design and the development of structures and technologies that impact how we do video witnessing. So that's the sort of overview of Witness. I want to talk now about sort of where we are, where we see ourselves in the world. And, I think as I go through this list, I think these will all be things that are familiar to you as people who live in the world. And just to point out that, I think our current context includes both, not only increased threats and potential harms, but also new opportunities and greater access for all kinds of people to participate. So yeah, so first of all, I think this is probably apparent to everyone on this call, but we're seeing the growing centrality of audiovisual and digital communications in our lives. It's hard to deny. And growing out of that, we see a growing ability for almost anyone to participate as a witness. So obviously, with smartphones, camera phones, the ability for anyone to be a witness is so much more open than even, let's say, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. On the negative flip side of things, we're also seeing the proliferation of manipulated media and a growing climate of mistrust. So you've probably seen yourself in this year of elections, this massive election year, globally, just the amount of disinformation that has been circulating around elections has been enormous. Another thing we're seeing in the global context is the unprecedented power and influence of tech companies, which disproportionately and negatively has impacted the global South. So, I mean, there's many different examples, but one would be like the way that platforms like Meta have handled things like content moderation and hate speech and incitement to violence. So there was, well documented the way they handled hate speech and incitement in Myanmar against the Rohingya minority back in 2017, and the impact that had on like real world events. More recently, the impact of hate speech and incitement on social media in Ethiopia during the Tigray conflict in 2022. Another global trend we're seeing is the increase of authoritarian actors weaponizing technology to control, survey, and intimidate their populations. So, examples of this would include like the rise of internet shutdowns as a tactic of authoritarian actors. So like either completely shutting down the internet or blocking access to certain sites for information. We've seen this in India, in Russia during the invasion of Ukraine, etc. And then finally, we're seeing a really rapid development in generative AI and in relation to video to deepfakes. If you're familiar with that concept, things are changing so quickly without consideration for a lot of things, but especially without consideration of the opportunities and harms, potential harms to people in the global South. So this is sort of the global context that we see ourselves working in. And I wanted to just kind of share a more local example from Nigeria of this global context that I hope maybe will help illustrate what is happening in a lot of different places. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the EndSARS movement in Nigeria. It's a movement calling for the disbanding of SARS, which is the Special Anti-Robbery Squad of the Nigerian police, which is like a unit that was, known for its brutality and kind of lawlessness, for many years. So what happened was that in 2020, the SARS was responsible for the extrajudicial killing of 2 civilians, which sparked massive nationwide protests in Nigeria, especially involving youth. So, during this time, it was October 2020, there were large protests, there were unlawful arrests, there was all kinds of police misconduct, and all of this culminated on October 20th of 2020, when the Nigerian army was brought in and ended up opening fire on unarmed protesters at a place called Lekki Gate in Lagos. During this, at least 11 protesters were killed by the shootings, and this finding was backed up not only by organizations like Amnesty International and major news outlets like CNN, Wall Street Journal. It was also confirmed by the Nigerian government itself through its a judicial panel of inquiry that it had set up to investigate the incident. But unfortunately, maybe I'll read this out to you. But despite the government's own findings, the government denied its own findings, saying that blanks were fired and that nobody was killed. So maybe this is just an excerpt from a New York Times article. Though the Nigerian government and several pro-government activists had maintained that no massacre occurred, some social media users, including the Nigerian songwriter and musician Obianuju Catherine Ude, who goes by DJ Switch, live streamed the demonstration. People scared and scarred in the video could be heard screaming, "They are shooting," as they ran in different directions seeking cover. On the first anniversary of the protest last month, Nigeria's Information and Culture Minister, Lai Mohammed, demanded an apology from the trio of Amnesty International, CNN, and DJ Switch for, quote, misleading the world. The military did not shoot at protesters at the Lekki tollgate on October 20, 2020, and there was no massacre at the tollgate, Mr. Mohammed told journalists during a news conference in Abuja, Nigeria's capital. The only massacre recorded was in the social media. So, despite the findings of their own judicial panel, they denied and continue to deny, what was documented and confirmed by many witnesses and researchers and investigators. And, not only denied, but demanded an apology from these people that were asserting what happened. And so this is the sort of a really clear example of what we're talking about, when the global context that I'm talking about, and thinking about what impact that has on human rights defenders. So in the aftermath of the protest, DJ Switch, the live streamer, was attacked by government supporters who accused her of spreading lies about the protest. And so this is the case with a lot of the activists who were involved in this movement. They had to leave Nigeria. It was unsafe for them to stay there. But I wanted to read this quote from DJ Switch about why she thought what she did was important and why people need to continue to do it. She said, "Let's make sure that the world sees this so they don't change the story and tell people that we killed ourselves. I didn't want us to die in vain." I just think that's a really powerful quote from her, and just really speaks to the importance of the work that activists are doing in their communities and why they continue to document. So in light of this context that we find ourselves in, I wanted to just give a sort of high-level overview of how we are approaching our work and how we are trying to address the context that we're in. And the way that we frame the work is through this idea of fortifying the truth and centering communities most impacted by human rights violations. So we center communities most impacted by human rights violations, and we do that by serving and working alongside members of those communities who are activists and local experts who are using video and technology to challenge and end the human rights violations that their communities face. We also work to support others who are maybe outside of those communities, but who are working in alignment with the demands of communities. So for instance, like other peer organizations, other global organizations. And what we try to do is to fortify the credibility, integrity, and power of critical human rights accounts. And when we work with documenters, with witnesses, we work to emphasize the importance of creating trustworthy video that can be verified. Alongside that, we also work to strengthen the voices and narratives of vulnerable communities whose accounts, no matter how trustworthy, no matter how verifiable, are still being easily dismissed. So now I just want to share some of the initiatives at Witness that the Archives program is actively involved in. And so those initiatives are called Video for Justice, Video for Earth, and Create and Share, which is like that bottom left quadrant in our theory of change. So yeah, so our Video for Justice initiative is focused on democratizing access to skills and tools for strengthening video documentation that is, as we mentioned, often questioned and excluded in justice and accountability processes. So including archiving skills and tools. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. We also, through this initiative, want to ensure that frontline witnesses are heard in the development of new technologies and standards that can impact their safety and their ability to effectively defend human rights. And so this initiative is focused in our Africa, Asia, and Middle East and North Africa regions. And in this initiative, the way that we see archiving involved is through this idea of the justice pipeline for video documentation. So the way that we conceive it, for video documentation to be used and usable for justice and accountability, first of all, it first needs to be documented. It needs to be archived, and then it needs to be usable for analysis, which we're including here OSINT, or open source intelligence research and investigation. It needs to be presented or curated, and then can be and then used towards achieving justice and accountability. So our aim is to build skills and strengthen capacities in all of these different areas through our Video for Justice collaborations. And these collaborations include like hands-on partnerships, like projects, as well as things like organizing convenings and trainings where we can share knowledge and learnings with each other. So I wanted to share an example of one project that we've been working on through our Video for Justice initiative. It's a partnership with an organization called Rohingya Vision, called the Rohingya Genocide Archive. I'm not sure if folks are aware of the sort of the plight of the Rohingya in Myanmar. For decades, they've faced discrimination and persecution. But in 2017, there was a major crackdown by the Myanmar military. Approximately 600,000 Rohingya people had to flee from Rakhine State to avoid acts of genocide against them, crimes against humanity. And to this date, they continue to be subjected to horrendous acts perpetrated by officials in the Myanmar military. So this project, the Rohingya Genocide Archive, is really focused on memorializing as well as collecting evidentiary documentation of atrocities that were perpetrated against the Rohingya. So up to now, we've trained and supported Rohingya archivists to select, describe, archive, preserve over 600 videos since 2018. Our focus this year was sort of on hardening and strengthening the capacity of the archive. And so one thing we did was that we partnered with our peer organization, HURIDocs, which stands for Human Rights Documentation Systems. They're the developers of a tool called UWASI, which is basically a human rights documentation cataloging system. And so we migrated the Rohingya Genocide Archive collection into UWASI to make it easier for the archivists to collaborate, easier for the archive to provide limited access to the collection, and easier for them to sort of do analysis on the metadata. So the vision of this archive is not only to provide evidence to human rights mechanisms that are seeking justice and accountability, which we've already been doing, but also in the longer term to stop the erasure, the erosion of the collective memory within the Rohingya community of what happened in 2017 and onwards. And so as part of this, it's really important that this archive is owned and controlled by Rohingya community, as obviously they know best what kinds of access, what kinds of restrictions are required that are needed to best serve and protect their community. So some of the lessons we've drawn from doing the work with the Rohingya archive and in other parts of the Video for Justice work is that, well, and this might be obvious to some of you, but archiving projects require a lot of hands-on support. This is, something that's, a challenge. Our partners are challenged with capacity to get started and to sustain projects. And this is something we're still trying to figure out, the sustainability of projects beyond our partnerships. Secondly, with the Rohingya project, there were a lot of security concerns. There's a lot of security issues that need to be considered. And maybe it's an obvious thing to say, but it really hits home when you're trying to work on a project, is that security needs and measures add an extra layer of complication to every step in the archiving process. When encryption is required, when alternate identities are required, it just makes things so much more complicated. Thirdly, when you're working on in partnership with community-based organizations on archive projects, it's really important to understand the sometimes very complex community dynamics that occur, due to, in the Rohingya context, like dispersal, trauma, mental health, the hardships that the communities might continue to face due to discrimination, the security concerns that they have. It's really important to understand those. And then on top of that, to have awareness of the impact of INGOs, so international non-governmental organizations such as ourselves, have on these dynamics. So, when organizations come in and provide support, financial support, recognition to certain, certain community organizations rather than others, it introduces even more complexity to those dynamics. Another thing that we've learned is just the challenge of meeting very specific needs with the available, accessible tools that are available to do this work, and sort of coming upon their limitations. And so in our work, we always try to use tools that are sustainable, open source, don't require a lot of resources to sustain, but that we have to work within what is available. And then finally, another challenge that we're continuing to try to work out is the challenge of the pipeline. And so if you recall that pipeline, archiving is just one step. The ultimate goal is justice and accountability. And so, even if you successfully archive, then what? How do you move from archiving to the next step of making the collection be usable and be used for that goal? Next, I want to talk about our Video for Earth initiative. So this initiative is centered on supporting and bolstering the impact of youth who are leveraging social media and short-form video to defend communities and our planet. Our work is to ensure that grassroots communities have tools to push against and shift dominant narratives around development, to defend their land from exploitative and extractive industries, and to fight state-sponsored violence. And so this initiative is focused in our regions of Latin America and the Caribbean and Brazil and in the US. And I don't know if my colleague Ines was able to join today or not. I can't see who's on the call, but hi Ines, if you're there. So in terms of the projects that have an archival component, for Video for Earth, we don't have like one single intensive collaborative archiving project similar to the Rohingya Genocide Archive, but we are sort of more earlier stages of listening to partners, trying to understand their needs, and assessing whether and how we can best support archival endeavors that they want or have the capacity to undertake. And so some of the work that we've been doing in the Video for Earth initiative include microgrants to help partners get their archiving projects off the ground. We've done that in Ecuador and Peru and Brazil. Ines has been leading like meetings and trainings with different partners in Ecuador, Mexico, and Brazil. She's also been providing consultation and support for Colectivo Catarse, which is a media organization from South Brazil that we've worked with for many years. They have a collection of 20 years of video making that involve indigenous and Quilombo communities, so former slave communities, rural struggles, and human rights. And so she's been supporting them on developing their archive. We also have a project to help support and consult with an audiovisual collection, Dos Meritorios. So Meritorios is kind of a play on the word territorios. It's like mare being the sea versus the land. And so this is a new community archive and oral history project that is connected to the marine ecosystem in Niterói, near Rio in Brazil, that's inhabited by an artisanal fishing community. I just wanted to share this one picture of Ines. This was just taken just last week at ATL, which is like an encampment, one of the largest gatherings of indigenous communities, the largest gathering of indigenous communities in Brazil, maybe even globally. It happens every year. And our Brazil team was able to attend. And this photo is just a picture of Ines meeting with Bepuno Kayapo from Colectivo Bature to talk about their plans for their archives project, just to give you a sort of visual idea of the work. And so some lessons from the Video for Earth work, and if Ines is here, I don't want to speak for you, so if there's anything I'm missing, please feel free to put it in the chat. Yeah, I would say some things that we've learned is that, you know, not every, this culture of archiving preservation, as, you know, as maybe I think about it, is not always present in all the different places that we work. And so establishing just the idea that archiving and preservation is something that people might want to consider doing is sort of like a first step that needs to happen. In other contexts, you know, there might be a strong culture of memory work that's conceived in like a different way than archiving preservation might be conceived here in New York, for instance. And that, you know, the way that we approach collaborations or approach creating materials have to reflect those contexts. What we found is that with the Video for Earth partners that we have, the main stresses include lack of funding, concern about the ability to just get projects off the ground and sustain them, and a desire to work outside of, you know, the big tech platforms, of, you know, dependence on like, you know, Google or other big companies, and a desire for more autonomous infrastructure. Some of the technical concerns that come up include just like basic hardware needs, and also how to deal with old media. So like, you know, legacy video formats. So another thing that we've learned is that, you know, with partners who are just starting out with archiving, it's really important to move at their pace and to provide support for getting started. So that could mean like kind of just consultations and workshops that kind of are at the, moving at their own pace. Microgrants have been really key to help kind of jumpstart projects, and quick guides, like simple, really accessible guidance, so that people can just kind of jump in and get a sense of what is involved in archiving and preservation. So finally, the last bucket or initiative that I wanted to share is just our create and share work. And so this is where we create accessible resources that are related to our technical and thematic areas of expertise, so including video archiving. This is where we localize resources and do digital engagement around them to reach online audiences and to share the strategies and tactics that we're learning across regions in timely ways. And this is also where we support the communities of practice that we're part of to learn from each other through trainings, convenings, and other kind of field building work. So we have a library of all of our resources. It's at library.witness.org. Everything is free to download and to use, to repurpose. It's all Creative Commons licensed if you want to check that out. There's many different archiving resources in the library. These are just a few. Many are co-created with our partners. So the resource on the left, Should I Create and Archive These Videos? That was co-created with Texas After Violence Project. We have resources in all different types of formats, including tip sheets, online courses, videos, guides. So please check out our library if you're interested. In terms of field building, both Ines and I participate in archival communities of practice globally. So whether that's attending meetings or conferences or webinars like this one, to contribute to our perspectives and also to learn about new developments in the field, emerging ideas, emerging approaches. Yeah, so we're really happy to take part in that community. And here are just some photos showing this work. So some lessons that I can share from this creating and sharing work is that definitely the most useful guidance and engagement materials that we create are rooted in learnings from our real world experience in collaboration with our partners. And this is Witness's whole model. We create and share out of what we learn from listening and anticipating and collaborating for impact. What we found, though, is like, while we have so much guidance, is that we need to find better ways or better formats for our guidance that is more easily updatable and localizable. So like having multi-page PDFs is really hard to update and localize and keep version control and all of that. So that's something that is a challenge that we're trying to address. We also see the need that we need to present our guidance sometimes with more context. So like a guide to our guidance so that people can find their way in. So our library is great. People can find all of our resources, but sometimes, it's hard to know where to get started if you just kind of go to the library, just, cold and do a search. And so this is something that we're trying to work on in the next year. We're going to be updating our Activist Guide to Archiving video. That's a resource that maybe some of you have seen before. It's a long form guide on video archiving for human rights. We're going to be doing a new version of that is much more modular, much more updatable, and inclusive of many different new topics. And then the final lesson, I think, is that, I feel really lucky to be part of different archival communities globally. I found, almost universally, like this community has been very open. Everybody's interested. There is with sharing, what they know. There is a culture of knowledge sharing and of open source development in this community. And so, yeah, just very grateful to be part of it. So that's actually all from me. If you want to get in contact with me, I'm happy to hear from anyone. That's my email address, Yvonne@witness.org. And with that, I have no idea how long I've been talking, so I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and see the time. And I think we're okay.
We're good, yeah. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
If anyone has any questions, just drop them in the chat. And I have a few questions myself. And I think my first one's very broad and open-ended, so answer it however you want. But how can we help? How can the archival community, broadly speaking, support this kind of work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, as I was saying, being able to rely on this community has been incredibly helpful for me in terms of just the willingness of everybody in this community to share knowledge. And so I kind of see myself playing this kind of intermediary role, kind of translating things coming out of the archival community so that it speaks to the communities that I kind of work to support. But I'm very dependent on like that knowledge coming to me and the willingness of people to like share. So taking part in things like this, taking part in panels, going to conferences is something I, really get a lot of value from. The other thing I think is that that I really value is that when we share our workout, through our engagement or through other forms, I find the archival community has been very receptive. And so, yeah, so kind of taking when we kind of share about like what we learn about the needs of human rights documenters and what their needs are in terms of like archival support or, the ways that they might want to influence like kind of like larger systems. And we communicate that out to have a receptive audience of people in the archives world who have influence, who want to reshare. That is like super helpful as well.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. So we have a few questions in the chat now. The first one, do you have a historical archive that is open to researchers and media makers, such as documentary filmmakers?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So as I mentioned earlier, like my role initially at Witness, Nathan, as you well know, was as Witness's archivist. So we do have our own collection because we've been around for 30 some years. We used to co-produce a lot of kind of short form documentaries with our partners. So we do have a collection. As we all know, funding, sustaining collections, especially ones that aren't open to the public and that aren't part of institutions, is incredibly challenging. We've struggled with that a lot. And so, currently I'm not Witness's archivist. We don't have an in-house archivist. We did transfer our collection to an institution some years ago, but it remains inaccessible to the public. It's like mostly not digitized. And so, yeah, we don't have any way of providing access to our collection to users. I mean, we don't even have a physical office anymore. So there's nowhere for researchers to come. Yeah.
That's unfortunate because it is a great collection. I can say from experience.
Yeah.
All right, next question. I'm curious about distinctions different communities might make between what they want recorded and what, to maintain tradition, they don't want recorded.
Mm-hmm.
For example, whether an oral tradition is recorded as an oral history. Would this be part of localizing content?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know how to answer this. We haven't done a lot of like oral history type work. We're mainly work with like what we call like witnesses, so people who might be like just documenting like a violation happening in their community, who might be just posting it up online. So not people who are doing like recording testimonies or interviews as much. But definitely the whole idea of like consent is like is an issue even for that kind of recording as well. Because obviously like recording somebody can put them at a lot of risk, in a lot of risk, and also for the person recording as well. So, obviously like metadata that, gets like, recorded when you film a video that can travel with the video, in some instances can reveal where like the filmer is, where the person that they're filming is, and can put people at risk. I don't think I'm answering Kimberly's question exactly. In terms of localizing content, that's more in reference to our sort of guidance and training materials. Yeah, and so it's really important. So when we talk about localization, we're not just talking about translating. Like straight translation often doesn't work. Like it really has to be like the content itself needs to be localized to the context.
Okay. Another question. Do you have any tips for archiving video that is live streamed via social media? Are there any guides or resources you recommend? And do you know of any archives, groups, or listservs that discuss this?
I did write a blog post or a couple of blog posts, like they're a few years old now, on like capturing live streams. They're on blog.witness.org. If you kind of just search for live streams, you'll find it. But yeah, it depends on the platform. Um, yeah, it depends if you're capturing them afterwards or if you're trying to capture them like while they're streaming. If you're capturing them afterwards, it's the same as collecting other videos as long as they're still up. If you're trying to capture them live, I mean, you could use like a screen capture, like OBS or something like that, to capture in real time if you're really worried about that live stream going down, for instance. Yeah.
Okay. Another question from me. You were talking about like safety concerns. And I think in this field that's really important. So how do you balance like, I don't know, I guess the ethical aspects of like trying to balance preservation and access and people's safety and, privacy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. There's not one clear rule and then you follow it and you're all good. I mean, it is like you have to do that assessment. And so given that, like it's about like having a like the sort of a understanding who are you trying to prioritize when you make your decisions. And so for us, we're always prioritizing people who are impacted by the human rights violations above all else. And so when we're thinking about like safety or like consent, it's like what is in the service of that community first. And then you have to actually like make the difficult decisions. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, so okay, you mentioned this earlier, but you mentioned the kind of proliferation of generative AI and fakes and stuff and the
Yeah.
challenges that. Can you talk a little about how you're dealing or attempting to deal with that?
Yeah, so this is the major focus of our technology threats and opportunities program, which is I'm not a part of, but we have a website called, it's like gen-ai.witness.org if you want to look at some of the work. It's been a lot of the work has been like sort of researching and producing kind of thought leadership on the sort of intersection of these deep fakes and generative AI on human rights and how they impact like communities who are facing human rights violations. I'm sorry, and what was your question again, Nathan?
Oh, just like if you or if Witness has any like thoughts on how, I mean, I know this is all very early days,
Yeah.
but if you have any kind of thoughts or like plans, how you think you can kind of deal with this.
Yeah, I mean, like, so obviously one avenue is like strengthening the ability to detect deep fakes and manipulated media and also democratizing access to those detection techniques and tools, because like there are like people who are experts in this. They tend to be all centered in the global north. The sort of tools that are available, like they cost a lot of money, they're not easy to use. And so like we're thinking about how we can increase access to these tools, but also just sort of non-tech approaches that are more centered around like media literacy, that's useful for identifying all kinds of misinformation, not just like generative AI and deep fakes. And that can go a long way, because a lot of the manipulated media aren't really complex deepfakes. A lot of it is just like badly made, like misinformation, disinformation.
Now that makes sense. I don't know. I feel like so much of what this comes out of is this idea that like democratizing access to information can revolutionize how we, respond to stuff. And now we're having this like counter revolution of democratizing misinformation.
Right.
I don't really know if I figured it out yet.
Yeah, it's kind of like this, like it goes back and forth, and that's why you have to just keep on, keep on staying on top of it. Yeah.
What? So what have of your work at Witness, what do you think you're most proud of?
Oh man. I mean, I think the work that is most rewarding for me is when I work directly with our partners and with our regional programs. And so like when I feel like I've really played a role in helping a partner get their project going, I've provided, like I have a certain like skill set and training, and like I'm able to actually use that to support, their human rights campaign, to support their work that yeah, like the archiving work is sometimes it's very tedious, and it's very difficult to find like the capacity or like the time and the labor to do it if you're working on like, much bigger issues, right? And so I feel like, yeah, I find it really rewarding when I get to play a role in those collaborative projects. And I think Nathan might be frozen. Oh, I think we lost Nathan. Sam, are you there?
He's coming back.
Okay.
Am I back? Sorry.
Yes, yeah, we lost you for a second.
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm back then. Any more? Oh, I lost the. Sorry, I'm just reacquainting myself.
Yeah.
So speaking of like working with partners, how do you balance the kind of the trying to prioritize grassroots participation and then also like expertise and the kind of I'm trying to think of the right word here, but I feel like archiving is like there's all of these like systems and knowledge and technology and stuff, and you're kind of trying to like balance those best practices with also including as many people as possible and as many different viewpoints as possible.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, when I work on our project, like we try to and we're designing workflows or choosing tools, like it's all designed to fit the context where we're working. So we'll choose different tools or choose different approaches for different projects. And so having this sort of broader knowledge of like what's out there and like understanding like, so it's not just rote memorization of like best practices, it's understanding why those best practices exist so that you can, in a different context, like choose an approach that actually like meets the underlying reason why those best practices were established. So like what is the point, right? So it's not just like saying like this is the rule, we have to find the way to fit this rule into this context where it doesn't make sense. And so yeah, it's like knowing what the goals of the collection are, knowing what you're trying to achieve, and understanding why parts of the archival workflow or why certain archival functions are important and what they're meant to do, and then like finding a way to do that in a different context.
No, that makes sense. Thank you. Okay, we got another question in the chat. Do you have any tips for collecting video of protests? Oftentimes, those who are reporting are hesitant to archive their materials. Are you using donor agreements that protect the content, or are there other ways to protect ownership and identities of people within the videos?
Yeah, so yeah, there's certainly reasons why people might not want what they're filming to be archived, but often people who are filming because they want somebody to see it and they want somebody to collect it. So I'd say we don't collect that. We support partners who are embedded in their communities to, if the project calls for it, to collect, so sometimes that is like through like, that organization has connections to like journalists, and so they're actually like directly submitting to the organization. In other cases, it's like that open source research, open source investigation that I mentioned earlier. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept, but it's the idea of like collecting things that are posted to social media, like, downloading Twitter or Facebook videos. And in that case, there isn't that sort of consent. So there's a lot of ethical considerations when you're doing that. So yeah, so I would say with ownership in terms of like copyrighted stuff is less of an issue in this human rights context. It's more about like, yeah, protecting people, and yeah, and how the videos are making sure that those videos are not being used in ways that are like causing harm or like against the wants of those people or their community. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. So it's almost 7:30, so I think we're gonna wrap up. So final question, where do you see Witness going from here? Like, what do you, I know this is another really broad question, so answer it however you want. But like, what do you see looking forward?
I mean, I feel I'm so busy that I'm already like my whole next year is already all booked up. I mean, there's so much like in terms of like, let's say just archives specifically, not just Witness, like there's so much like need and interest for archival like skills and knowledge to support like our various partners and partners that we don't have yet, or partners who are just getting their projects off the ground. I mean, there's no
end to it.
Yeah, no, there's no end to it. And like just seeing the evolution of like audiovisual technologies over since I started at Witness in 2009. Like when I started, we were using videotapes and camcorders still. And that was 15 years ago. I mean, it's really hard to say like what's going to happen in 15 more years from now. But yeah, so just, yeah, like staying, grounded in our collaborative work, but also just keeping an eye on like all the changes in the broader landscape.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, Yvonne. This was fascinating. Thank you everybody else for showing up. We're going to have other great events. You should come to them, check our website. Thank you and have a nice night.
Thank you everyone for coming.